Hey y'all, what's good? And welcome to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you guys so much. Let's remember to have healthy dialogue, be respectful to ourselves and to each other, and to challenge the argument and not the person. Let's get it. Tamir Rice was shot and killed by the police in November of 2014 while playing with a toy gun in a local park. One of the first officers to arrive to the scene was Officer Timothy Loman. Timothy Loman was hired by the city of Cleveland after graduating from the Cleveland Police Academy. He was working as a trainee under supervision of Officer Garnback at the time of the incident. After the incident, Officer Loman decided to exercise his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. However, he did submit his statement in writing, and it reads as follows. I was in the company of my partner, Frank Garnback, working car 1, Adam 25. It was Saturday, November 22nd, 2014. Officer Garnback was my training officer. I was on probation. I had previously worked at the 4th District. I worked many cases, including homicides, aggravated robberies with a gun, and assaults with weapons. In the 4th District, I was involved in many active shooter cases. I started around 2:30 p.m. on November 22nd, 2014. Received a call to proceed to St. Ignatius Church on Lorraine and West Boulevard. While speaking to the priest at the St. Ignatius and finishing the call, we received a broadcast of a male waving a gun and pointing it at people at the Coudale Recreation Center. The description was of a black male, camouflage hat, gray jacket, black sleeves, at or near the swing set. We responded to a code 1. A code 1, for those of you who don't know, is with high priority. Officer Garnback was driving and I was working the radio. The other police cars were tied up and answering the calls. Our car was the closest car. Car 826 was coming from 150th and Lorraine, about 3 to 4 miles away. Officer Garnback told me to contact radio and advised that we would proceed. We went from St. Ignatius to the Coudale Recreation Center. We approached from 99th Street. 99th Street ends at the park and near the swing set. This entry to the park avoids the pylons and puts us closer to the location where the suspect is known to be. When we arrived, the suspect was not at the swing set. As we were even with the swing set, we observed a male matching the description given by the radio seated under the gazebo. The male was wearing a camouflage hat and gray jacket with black sleeves. I saw the suspect. Officer Garnback drove toward the gazebo. The driving conditions were cold and wet with a layer of snow like a dusting. I estimated we were traveling about 10 miles per hour based on the weather conditions. I saw the suspect pick up an object and stick it into his waistband as he stood up and walked toward the recreational center. Frank said, "Watch him. He's going to run." We feared he was going to run into the recreation center. As the car was approaching, the suspect turned toward our car. Officer Garnback attempts to stop the car as the male turns toward the car. The car's anti lock brakes rumbled as the car slid to a stop. As car is slid, I started to open the door and yelled continuously, "Show me your hands," as loud as I could. Officer Garnback was also yelling, "Show me your hands." Now, I don't know if you guys have had an opportunity to watch the first video that I did about this incident or whatever you want to call it. I'll leave it up to you. But this is incorrect. So, unfortunately, the footage from the park is very fuzzy and hard to make out. Tamir was sitting under the gazebo, but it's unclear if he actually picked up anything and placed it in his waistband. However, what we could see was the car speeding toward the gazebo. The car did slide. Officer Garnback was the driver of the car. He remained inside of the car. The other officer, Officer Lohman, was the one who exited the police car immediately as the car slid to a stop. He opened his door while the car was still moving. He did not yell anything, and he let off rounds into Tamir almost immediately. So this statement is false. He goes on to say, I kept my eyes on the suspect the entire time. I was fixed on his waistband and hand area. I was trained to keep my eyes on his hands because hands may kill. The male appeared to be over 18 years old and 185 pounds. Tamir was 12 years old. However, it was noted that he was tall and a little husky for his age. The suspect lifted his shirt, reached down into his waistband. We continued to yell, Show me your hands. I was focused on the suspect. Even when he was reaching into his waistband, I didn't fire. I still was yelling the command, Show me your hands. This statement is false. I tried to get to the back of the car. We are taught to get behind the cruiser for cover. We are taught shoot and move. You do not want to be sitting target. The suspect had a GUN, had been threatening others with the weapon, and had not obeyed our command to show us his hands. He was facing us. This was an active shooter situation. Now, I will not uh, refute that. That is probably what the police is told. I am not a police officer, and that makes sense. However, Tamir, it's clear as day on the video, they did not continuously give him any type of commands whatsoever. Okay. I had very little time as I exited the vehicle. We are trained to get out of the cruiser because the cruiser is a coffin. I observed the suspect pulling the GUN out of his waistband with his elbow coming up. Officer Garnback and I were still yelling, Show me your hands. This is false. With his hands pulling out the GUN and his elbow coming up. I knew it was a GUN and I knew it was coming out. I saw the weapon in his hands coming out of his waistband, and the threat to my partner and myself was real and active. This statement is false. Tamir did not pull anything from his waistband. Per the investigation, it shows that Tamir did reach down by his waistband. However, he did not pull anything out. I fired 2 shots based on tap tap training. I shot toward the GUN in his hand. After 2 shots, I went to the rear of the cruiser. I planted my foot and twisted my ankle. After suspect was down, I didn't know if the threat was over. Frank Garnback continued to yell, Show me your hands. Now we're going to hear from Officer Frank Garnback, who was the FTO, the field training officer of Timothy Loman. He was also the officer who was driving the police car. Officer Garnback is a first district patrol officer and had been with the department at the time of the incident for 7.5 years. Officer Garnback exercised his Fifth Amendment rights to remain silent, but did submit a written statement. He says, I, Frank Garnback, state as follows in regards to the Tamir Rice shooting incident at Kudale Recreation Center on November 22nd, 2014. He says, I was working 1 Adam 25 on the afternoon of November 22nd, 2014 with Patrol Officer Lohman. I started at 2:30 p.m. Patrol Lohman was a new officer on probation at the time. I was training him. Very, very early in our shift, we responded to an alarm call at St. Ignatius Church at 10205 Lorraine Road. While finishing up that call, we overheard a Code 1 broadcast reporting a male waving a GUN and pointing it at people. at Coudale Recreation Center. It was radioed that there was a black male at Coudale waving and pointing a GUN. The male was threatening and scaring people with a hand GUN. He was on or near the swing set. We responded to code 1. I made the decision to approach the park from West 99th. West 99th dead ends at the park very near the swing set. From there, I know we would have a good view of the swing set and good access if necessary, as that is where the male was reported to be. Unlike the parking lot, there is no barriers to automobiles. I observed that the male was not at the swing set. When I did not see him there, I entered the park and drove by the swing set toward the gazebo. As we moved into the park, I saw the male in the gazebo. He matched the description given over the radio. Black male, camouflage hat, and a gray sweatshirt, jacket with black sleeves. He saw us and started walking toward the recreation center building. This is false, and I meant to point that out in the other officer's statement. Tamir got up and walked toward the cop car when he saw the cop car pulling up. He did not walk toward the recreation center. I believe at first the male was going to run. I think I told my partner, watch him. He's going to run. However, he stopped and turned toward our cruiser. Okay, so this is true. However, again, Tamir got up and walked toward the cruiser. He did not walk toward the recreation center and turn to walk toward the cruiser. I was traveling at 10 to 12 miles per hour once in the park. Part of my intention was to keep him away from entering the rec center. The cruiser did slide as I applied the brakes. I am not sure how far. The car did not stop where I intended. I first saw the GUN that the male had a GUN about the time Patrol Officer Loman exited the cruiser. The male was pulling it from the right area of his waistband. I thought the GUN was real. Again, Tamir never had an opportunity to pull anything out of his waistband. I believe the cruiser windows were up at the time of these events, but I am not sure. Both Patrol Loman and I directed the male to show his hands. I thought the male was an adult, over 18 years old. I saw the GUN loose on the ground a few feet from the male after he was shot. I moved it further away from him. Okay, now we're going to hear from Patrol Officer William Cunningham. On the day of the incident, Officer Cunningham had been employed as a Cleveland police officer for over 14 years. On November 22nd, 2014, Officer Cunningham, in full uniform, was working part-time security inside the Coudale Recreation Center at the sign-in desk during the time of the shooting. The security cameras are locked in a separate room and were not available for Officer Cunningham to view while sitting at the sign-in desk. Officer Cunningham was unaware that Tamir was pointing the replica firearm at various individuals at the recreation center that afternoon. At some point, seconds after the shots were fired, a youth ran up to Officer Cunningham and told him that police had just shot someone. Officer Cunningham went out to investigate and heard Tamir's sister scream and run toward the crime scene. At that point, Officer Cunningham ran after her as Officer Garnback tried to stop her. Officer Cunningham indicated that Tamir's sister was kicking and screaming and would not calm down. Thus, Officer Cunningham assisted Officer Garnback in placing handcuffs on her. Officer Cunningham further stated that Tamir's sister was not tackled, but since the ground was slippery as she ran toward the scene, Officer Garnback put out his arms and her feet slipped out from under her and she fell. It was Officer Cunningham's idea to place her in the back of the car since she would not calm down. Officer Cunningham indicated that Officer Loman appeared upset and distressed. Within 90 seconds of the shooting, Officer Cunningham asked Officer Loman what happened. Officer Cunningham indicated that Officer Loman stated to him that he didn't give me a chance. He reached for the GUN and he gave me no choice. There was nothing I could do. Officer Cunningham further indicated that when he observed the weapon on the ground, he believed it was real and that he helped secure the scene until backup arrived. Officer Cunningham also observed the arrival of the FBI agent who started to administer first aid to Tamir with the help of Officer Garnback. Now, this is where it gets a little funny, and not funny in the sense of ha ha, but more so, you don't hear any of the officers state that they tried to administer any type of CPR, first aid, or any other type of life saving measures to Tamir. Now, Officer Lohman, which is the officer who shot at Tamir, claims that he twisted his ankle and so he stayed behind the cop car for cover. And I understand that because you don't know if the quote unquote threat is still imminent, right? So you don't know what type of danger you're in. I get that. But after a little bit, if you see that he's not moving and your field training officer has approached Tamir and he was able to kick the GUN out of the way, then he should have immediately started to perform some type of life-saving measures. It wasn't until Officer Cunningham, who was the off-duty security guard, came outside that they mentioned that the field training officer tried to administer first aid, which in this case, it was almost too late because Tamir had been shot in his abdomen and the bullet was traveling. So now we're going to hear from Detective Daniel Lenz. Detective Lenz is a Marine Corps veteran, which at the time had 18 years under his belt, um, being a Cleveland police officer. He worked as a police with the Major Crimes Division. He was working with the FBI as a special agent on the date in question, investigating an unrelated bank robbery. They were in the area of West 117th Street when they heard the broadcast of shots fired. Now, keep in mind that the incident took place around West 99th Street, so they were very close. Detective Lynch stated, "We didn't know what we were approaching. I just know there was a call for shots fired. I didn't know if it was an active shooter. I didn't know if the officers had been shot or if the officer shot someone else or just shots fired in general." Now, if you watched my first video about this, it seems to me that there was miscommunication all the way around, starting with 911, the dispatcher who relayed the call to the first officers who decided to go to the scene. She did not alert them in full detail what was said from the person who called 911 in the first place. And now reading this, the officers who shot Tamir, or the officer who shot Tamir, did not let them know enough information. They just said shots fired. And so now this detective is saying that he didn't know what was taking place, if it was still an active shooter situation, if there were other people in the area who may have GUNs who are shooting, if it's a standoff situation, a hostage situation, nothing like that. They just said the shots were fired. So it says Detective Lenz and the FBI agent proceeded to Kudell Recreation Center, where the FBI agent immediately began administering first aid to Tamir, who was laying on the ground. Detective Lenz observed the scene with his attention drawn to the GUN laying within 20 feet of Tamir. Initially, Detective Lenz thought the gun was real, but after noticing the magazine was separate from the gun, the Detective Lenz saw a green ball and at that point realized that the magazine and ammunition were not real. Referring to his experience and knowledge of firearms, including teaching classes as a concealed weapons instructor, he stated that he thought the weapon looked 1,000% real. At that point, a male, later identified as Tamir's older brother, arrived on the scene and tried to enter past the crime scene tape and was detained and put in another squad car. When Detective Lenz attempted to calm this individual down, he spit in Detective Lenz's face. Detective Lenz additionally had several interactions with the female in the original squad car, which is Tamir's sister, but was able to calm her down and lowered the rear driver side window for her. Detective Lenz, after talking to Tamir's sister, had trouble believing that Tamir was 12 years old. Detective Lenz was under the impression that Tamir was between 17 or 18 years old. So now we're going to hear from the other special agent. His name has not been released. The FBI special agent has been with the FBI since 2012, assigned to the Cleveland field office since the beginning of his career. Currently, he is assigned to the Violent Crime Task Force with a focus in bank robberies and serves as the Division Bank Robbery Coordinator. Prior to joining the FBI agent was a Rochester police officer from January 2010 to September 2012. He has 4.5 years of service in the United States Marine Corps as an infantryman, as well as what is this word? Reconnaissance? Okay, maybe. The FBI agent is also currently serving in the United States Air Force National Guard in New York as a pararescue. Through his duties in the United States Air Force, he is involved in civilian combat search and rescue. I'm sorry. The FBI agent is currently serving in the United States Air Force as a National Guard pararescue. Through his duties in the United States Air Force, he is involved in civilian combat search and rescue and is a national registered paramedic. The FBI agent additionally was deployed to Afghanistan while serving in the Air Force. On Saturday, November 22nd, 2014, the FBI agent was with the Cleveland Police Detective Daniel Lenz following up on an unrelated bank robbery investigation, and this is his report. At approximately 3:30 p.m., we heard a broadcast over the CPD emergency dispatch for a shooting. We initially thought that the subject was shot and he was fleeing, and that quickly changed while they qualified it and said the individual was shot and they were requesting fire and EMS response. We made it there in 3 minutes after the shooting happened. As I approached the officers, I asked for any first aid equipment, medical gear, anybody that has anything like that to bring it over here. They didn't have any of that. So I said, okay, give me a pair of rubber gloves. And I walked over to Tamir and began to assess him and do the medical treatment I could. The FBI agent at first did not see Tamir move as he lay on his back on the concrete with his coat open and his shirt partially pulled up, exposing his abdomen. As he was assessing Tamir, the FBI told Tamir that he was a paramedic and he was there to help. Tamir responded with a nod of his head and he reached for the FBI agent's hand. The FBI agent afterward related his impression of the injury. Now, I'm going to stop here. Protect your mental health. I appreciate everybody for supporting me. This case is heavy and it's hard. Okay. Click off if you can't handle hearing things like this. Okay. The reality of an injury like this is that he needed bright lights and cold surgical steel. He needs a surgeon to repair that. He needs to go to surgery. That's the end all result. That's the only thing that is going to repair the damage. The only thing we're going to do on the scene was just to keep him alive long enough to get to the hospital. He needed blood products and he needed surgery. The FBI agent also indicated that Tamir told him his name and made a reference to a GUN, but does not recall exactly what he said. Officer Garnback also assisted the FBI agent in administering first aid, and that at one point the FBI agent felt threatened by a disturbance that occurred as Tamir's older brother came onto the scene. The FBI agent also stated that he heard Tamir's sister in the back of the squad car scream that Tamir was only 12 years old. The FBI agent stated that this surprised him because Tamir's size gave the impression that he was an older male. After making sure that Tamir was on his way to the hospital with EMS, the FBI agent turned his attention to the injured Officer Lohman. Now, remember, Officer Lohman said that he twisted his ankle. He stated that Officer Lohman was distraught and declined assistance from the FBI agent. The FBI agent specifically described his interaction within 10 minutes of the shooting with Officer Lohman this way. He seemed like a guy that was put in a very difficult situation and had to make a very quick decision based upon what he believed was an imminent fear of death or serious physical injury to himself and reacted to it. Either way, I don't believe it was a situation he wanted to be in. Officer Lohman told the FBI agent it in what the agent believed to be a spontaneous utterance. He had a GUN and he reached for it after he was told to show his hands. The FBI agent told him he was only there to see if he needed medical attention. The FBI agent further stated Officer Lohman seemed to be in a lot of pain, but that Lohman said he would wait for EMS to arrive to get medical assistance. The FBI agent further described Lohman's demeanor. I think it was very difficult. I think it was a very difficult situation for him to deal with. And you knew probably now as the adrenaline is wearing off, I think the realization is kicking in that he had just shot someone. The FBI agent also mentioned that he did not see the weapon but heard the officers talk about it. After seeing Officer Lohman, Detective Lenz and the FBI agent asked Sergeant Janelle Rutherford if they could assist in any way and were told to make sure they were entered into the crime scene log. Then they left the scene. Okay, we're going to read one more officer. Let's see how many officers we have. Let's read a little more and then we're going to break for part two. So this is from Patrol Officer Zen Zivrina. Sorry, I can't pronounce that last name. It's different. I'll just say Officer Z. At the time of the incident, Officer Z had been a CPD officer for 3.5 years and assigned to the first district his entire career. On November 22nd, 2014, Officer Z was partnered with Officer Roman driving one Adam 26. So this is a different car. At about 3:30 p.m., as Patrol Officer Z with Officer Roman were clearing a domestic dispute when they heard a broadcast of a man with a GUN at Cudell Recreation Center. While en route to Cudell, they heard shots fired, send EMS. And 6 minutes later, they arrived on the scene and observed an unknown male, the FBI agent, near the suspect. The FBI agent asked Officer Z for medical equipment, and Officer Z responded they did not have any. Officer Z observed Tamir lying on the pavilion floor with his head facing south and legs facing north. Officer Z did not hear Tamir talking but did observe him breathing. Officer Z further stated that he observed a full frame, black semi automatic hand GUN just north of where Tamir was laying on the grass and described Tamir as 18 to 20 years old, 6 feet tall, and about 200 pounds. Officer Z did not have any conversations with Officer Lohman or Garnback, but did hear Officer Lohman stating that his ankle was in pain. At that point, Officer Z was tasked with setting up a perimeter to protect the scene where he encountered a large black male who breached the scene crime tape and took up a fighting stance. This is Tamir's brother, I believe. With the help of other officers, Officer Z was able to peacefully place that individual into the back of a squad car parked nearby. Immediately after, a black male approached from the same direction, stating that he was Tamir's mother. Oh, Lord. Officer Z obtained permission from Sergeant Rutherford to have the mother ride in the EMS wagon with her son. Officer Z stated that the GUN appeared to be real and that he did not learn that it was a replica until some time after. He was also unaware that Tamir was only 12 years old. Now we'll hear the statement from Officer Ricardo Roman, and this will be the last one for part one of this video. At the time of the incident, Officer Roman had been employed as a CPD officer for 3 years and was partnered with Officer Z on the day in question. After clearing a domestic dispute, he heard the dispatch of a man with a GUN at the Coodale Recreation Center. As they were en route, they heard Officer Garnback's dispatch of shots fired, and at that point, Officer Roman did not know who was shot. Officer Roman was driving the car, and at 3:34, they arrived at the Coodale Recreation Center from West Boulevard, parking on the south side of the lot facing east. Officer Roman's initial observation was that there was a black automatic GUN and a magazine clip near where the suspect was lying, which he believed to be real. Officer Roman also described the suspect as a black male, early 20s, and easily over 200 pounds. Officer Roman stated that when he observed the suspect, he was experiencing shallow breathing. As the officer arrived, Officer Roman observed Officer Garnback assisting the FBI agent in administering first aid to Tamir. Officer Roman also observed the incident with Tamir's brother, as well as Tamir's mother arriving on the scene. Officer Roman stated he did not have any conversations with Officer Lohman, but based on Officer Roman's observations, he appeared to be very upset and gone back about what happened, except that he did briefly talk to Lohman about his ankle injury, and his main task on the scene was to guard the perimeter. So, to summarize this, if you did not have an opportunity to watch my first video, Tamir was in the park with a toy GUN that looked very much real. He borrowed the gun from his friend, but it became jammed one day when they were playing with it. Tamir's friend did give the GUN back to him and told him to be very careful because the orange portion of the GUN was missing and it could be mistaken for, a real GUN, right? So Tamir, being 12 years old, not thinking like an adult, not thinking someone would call the police on him, not thinking that, playing with a toy GUN would cause him to lose his life, was walking through the park playing cops and robbers with his friend and his cousin. Um, there was a bystander who called 911 and reported that Tamir was walking through the park waving the GUN, and that he was afraid. He also went on to tell the 911 dispatcher that it was a possibility that the GUN was fake and that the person waving it was most likely a child. The 911 dispatcher did not relay that information to the police. I want to believe that the reason she didn't was because she was trying to get someone out there immediately. She had put out a call for this several times and had not received a response because all of the officers in the area were on other calls. So there was a bank robbery, there was something that took place at a church, and I think someone's home alarm had went off. And this is the part that makes it very difficult because on one hand, the police have a job to do, right? The police have to respond based on the information that is provided to them. They received a call that there was an active shooter, even though the gun was not real and Tamir was not shooting anything. That is what was relayed to them. Per their training, they have to respond a certain way. right? Now, I don't agree with them pulling up as close as they did to Tamir. I do not agree with them exiting the vehicle and not um, giving the proper commands. And to be quite honest with you, it will never be clear if Tamir was actually reaching for his waistband or not. Now, it can be assumed that if he was reaching for his waistband, he was probably trying to show them that the GUN was fake. You got to remember this is a child, right? So he's probably thinking, I have time to show them, look, it's not real. But an officer does not have time to sit there and discern if something's real or fake. And that's what makes this case so hard. It makes it so incredibly hard. It does. I want to play very quickly the video. It's not gruesome or anything like that, but it's just for context. It is just so that you can formulate your own opinions and not just go based off what I think and what I feel. Okay. Um, and so give me a second. There's some key numbers here that I want you guys to remember. 2 seconds. Within 2 seconds of approaching Tamir, he was gunned down. In that report, the officer states that Tamir got up and tried to make a run for the recreation center, and that's not true. Tamir got up to respond to the officers. 2 seconds, he was on the ground bleeding. 4 minutes later, the FBI agent and the other officer, the FBI agent is a trained paramedic, arrived to the scene. There was no sense of urgency whatsoever. Okay. 8 minutes later, paramedics arrive, again with no sense of urgency. He's placed in the back of the EMS car after 13 minutes of being shot. He didn't have a chance to live. What infuriates me beyond the fact that he was shot within 2 seconds is the fact that nobody tried to help him after the fact. The police are trained to shoot and kill. Okay. The officer states that he shot his hand to prevent him from pulling out the GUN. I don't believe that. I believe that he fired a kill shot. Tamir went down to the ground immediately. The other cop decided to go and kick the gun away from him. He did so successfully, and that is when they should have at least tried to start administering some type of life-saving measures. Okay. Now, let's just play devil's advocate and say that he was reaching for this GUN. In that case, the cops are not entirely wrong. And I know a lot of you are going to be upset with what I'm saying, but it is what it is, y'all, right? The cops don't have time to sit there and decide if this is a child or if this is an adult. You got the call, he's gesturing, or so you think he is, and so you got to respond. And I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to let y'all formulate your own opinion. Thanks for watching. Y'all leave me some comments and let me know what you think. As always, y'all be easy. Peace.